We are. That's true. That when it was time to start, everybody just got quiet, and that's never happened, has it? So, well, happy to see everyone here. I will say this: wasn't planning on leading singing right on that one, but so some people ask me if I'm feeling better. I think I'm all the way better. But I will say this: sometimes when you're sick, like some remnants of it remain, and that always seems to happen when I have anything. I have one ear that'll remain stopped up. It's usually the left ear. I don't know what it is, but you all sounded great on this side of the room. I heard everything. I didn't hear a thing over here, and that's not a criticism of you. I just don't know if I can hear anything out of this at all. I know that I sounded awful, at least in my ears. So hopefully it sounded better to you all than it maybe did to me. Maybe that's what I should just say all the time. Like, I always get these ear troubles. That's why I don't sound good. But anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about humility. And our focus is going to be on Matthew chapter 23. So go ahead and turn there. I don't really think we'll be anywhere but there tonight. So if you're there, that's where we'll be for the bulk of the time. There'll be a few things at the start, but as long as you're Matthew 23, you should be good. We'll talk a little bit about humility. Before we get into what we have, I didn't really like the way it showed up on the screen last time, so I just typed it up there myself. The first time that the subject appears in the Bible, as we said, these are perhaps debatable, but you can see some examples here. But the first is Exodus chapter 10 and verse 3. Ben, do you care to read Exodus 10 and 3 there? Yeah, it's on. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's why we sang that first song there to start with. Last time we see it, First Peter chapter. Ben, I should have made you read this one. First Peter chapter 5, since you've been doing a lot of First Peter over the last few Sundays. Melvina, maybe this one. First Peter 5 and verse 6. It wasn't mean to exalt. That he may lift you up, as the song goes right there. All right, some examples from the Old Testament. Humility in the Old Testament. This is Numbers 12 and verse 3. Maria, do you care to read the first one there? Numbers 12 and 3. All right. Mom, do you care to do 2 Samuel 22 and 28? And Dad, Job 8 and 7. Okay, and so what we see there is three examples. There's more, but humility that appears. A couple times we see the word humble that shows up. In Job 8, though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would increase what? Abundantly. And when we think about abundantly increasing, that's not just an incremental, but a rather large growth instead. All right, let's go to the New Testament version. Let's see. Tony, do you care to the first one, Philippians 2 and verse 8? All right. Connie, do you care James 4 and verse 6? All right. And Linda, do you care to read the last one, James 1 and verse 9? Let the lowly brother glory in his exaltation. We saw the word exalted a minute ago, be built it up. And so let the lowly brother glory in being built up. They didn't say anything about building yourself up, right? It says, let the lowly brother glory in his exaltation. Okay. We've seen this on here, but this is something, again, these come from the little papers that I have, but humility is actually a strength in God's eyes. And sometimes people don't view it that way, right? We don't necessarily think of humility as being a strength, whereas pride is a weakness. And we need to learn that when we feel humble, we are actually closer to his strength. And when we feel like we have less than others, we actually have more in his eyes. We sometimes struggle with that though, right? When everything, when everything is going good, it's kind of us, right? Like, hey, look at all this, all that I've done. And when things are going bad, we point the finger and blame. But we see here it's kind of the opposite of that, as it were. All right. So tonight we're going to be in Matthew. What chapter did I tell you? 23. All right. Good. Thank you. All right. But there's a couple of terms that are going to come up. And so I just want to hit on this real quick before we get into anything else. The religious and political leaders from the time period. We're going to see scribes and Pharisees, most of it. Sadducees won't be mentioned, but I want to throw them up there just in case. But the scribes, lawyers, teachers, I know we use the word scribes there, but some people may not be, a scribe is to write something out, a copyist, as it were. Ben mentioned this last week or week before about lawyers. We think about lawyers being attorneys, and there's some truth to that for what this is, but also studiers of the law. But hopefully your lawyer is studying the law too. If your lawyer that you have doesn't study the law, he's probably not going to do a very good job at it. Pharisees on the other side there, they were the leading religious leaders. These were Jewish people, by the way. They controlled the temple, and they were a strict sect with many traditions, okay? Now, I don't know that the word tradition ever shows up in the Bible as something that we have to follow, but a lot of people get bound up in those same kind of traditions. We'll not be talking about the Sadducees, I don't think, at all tonight, but just for your reference, they controlled the priesthood, believed in the law of Moses only, and the last one is probably the most important one we think about within Christianity, because they denied the resurrection and the Spirit. So we'll refer to the whole thing tonight is going to be a repudiation of the scribes and the Pharisees. And so I just wanted us to know, at least off the top, what we're looking at, what we are talking about. So we're going to work our way almost through chapter 23. We may not hit all, we probably won't hit all of it, but we will get almost to the end. And so what I've got is like we've done the last few times in here. We'll read a little bit. I've got some questions that'll be sort of presented for you as well. Boo, do you care to start with us though tonight? Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 4. On chapter 23 in my Bible, the little title there across the top, it says, "Woe to the scribes and Pharisees." This is W-O-E, woe. What does that word mean? Woe unto something. This is not woe like you're slowing a horse down, but W-O-E. Be careful, okay? What else might we think with woe? Watch out. Punishment. Maybe need to be a little bit of pity. What you're seeing here might not necessarily be what you need to, this group may not be what you need to sort of deal with. Maybe, yes. Beware that all of those work, sort of work there. I'm sorry. Absolutely. So a couple of things here. On what, according to verse 2, did the scribes and the Pharisees sit? And there's going to be a lot of that, so you're going to need your Bible to refer back to it. But what do they sit there according to verse 2? Seat of Moses. Now, this is a sort of figurative language here. They don't have a chair that has Moses' name on it. But what does it mean that they sat on the seat of Moses? Absolutely. And they are. Very good. You might sometimes hear this, like, a president might say, "I'm sitting at the desk of George Washington." Well, it's not the literal desk, but you're looking at examples from the past, and you're maybe having to model yourself after. And so as we see here, they are sitting on the seat of Moses. They're following after the teaching of Moses right there. And so what did Jesus then say that meant to his disciples? What does that mean? That these people, these scribes and Pharisees, are sitting on the throne or the seat of Moses. I'm sorry. That they should obey them. Because they're going to tell you what? they're going to tell you what the law said. And remember, Jesus and Jesus's disciples are all of what religion? They're all Jewish. And they're hearing Jewish leaders telling them what the law is. And so he says, you need to hear what they say, because they're gonna book chapter and verse you to death on this. But number 3, what did Jesus say not to do? So don't do what they do. So explain that question 2 versus question 3. How am I supposed to listen because they're telling me the truth, but not do what they do? Explain that to me. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that would be. What? Any other?
It'd be like, obey the scriptures, not what you see other people do.
Okay. All right. Any others? True. All of these work. Okay. All of these are fitting. And so Jesus says this almost from the get-go. It almost seems like Jesus has sort of experience dealing with people who might not be doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And do we see that a little bit here in these first verses? Do we ever see the scribes and the Pharisees in conflict, I'll use that word, with Jesus in the scriptures? What did it seem like the Pharisees and the scribes, especially the Pharisees, what did it seem like they were always doing when Jesus was out teaching? Trying to catch him in some kind of wrongdoing. They'd ask him questions. We talked a little bit about this, I think, on Sunday, right? They would ask him these questions, and the real reason they were asking it was what? They're trying to say, whoa, but you said this right here instead. And so it was not necessarily a method of teaching. You know, if I want to teach you something, I don't need to go about it in a way that's going to trap you, right? My goal should be to explain to you whatever it is that you would need to hear. Okay. So what we're going to then get into is Jesus is going to rattle off every single verse in chapter 23, except for verse 1 is written in red. Okay. So your entire chapter of 23 is written in red, meaning that's the teaching of Jesus. And so Jesus is going to rattle off a number of different things that are in many ways criticisms of the scribes and the Pharisees. So let's look here at Matthew 23, verses 5 through 7. Tony, do you care to read this one? Phylacteries, All right. Now, what are you know what phylacteries are? They're the little boxes, aren't they? Right. And so Jesus said they make their phylacteries what? Broader, okay? Why do you think somebody would make their phylactery, the little Jewish box that kept the things? Why do you make it broad? So he's saying like, oh, there you go. That's a little fancier than others. They enlarge the borders of their garments. They would fringe their garments. Jewish people still fringe their garments. But why would they? What does it mean to enlarge the borders? A little bit more fringe. Instead of it being this long, it's going to be that long. Connie, what? Say that again. It's all for show. Because when I see these sort of things on there, I was like, oh, that phylactery is pretty big. That garment is pretty enlarged. What am I supposed to immediately think? This is somebody quite special. First question here. What purpose, according to Jesus, did the scribes and Pharisees have in doing their works? Why were they doing this? This is a direct quote from Jesus. They all are to be seen by men. Verse 6 says what? They love what? They love the best places at the feast, the best seats in the synagogue. And according to verse 5 through 7, we already said that. But then at the end of verse 7, what does it say that they really like? Rabbi Rabbi. That's that name, that title. We get wrapped up in that sometimes. We like the good seat at the feast sometimes. All right, we tend to like that occasionally. We like to be recognized and seen, called rabbi, as it were. Yeah. Yes. 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 The best of the best, like you said, man. Absolutely. But we can get wrapped up in this sometimes, can't we? We can kind of get wrapped. Why do we like this? A little recognition. Say it again. Makes you feel good. It absolutely does. What else? Attention. And sometimes if maybe we're not quite getting it the way we want, we might broaden that fringe or have a bigger phylactery. People might notice that a little more. We talk about this. This is not a religious thing necessarily either. Is this a human life thing? Is this a work thing? Is it a home thing? Is it a school? We all can fall into that if we're not careful. Thoughts on it? Right. Sure. Yep. Absolutely. And this is something that it doesn't seem like it was new, 2,000 years ago, and it seems like it would probably still happen here today. Okay. All right, let's go a little further here. Matthew 23, verses 8 through 12. Connie? All right. So I feel like, especially verse 12, is probably familiar to a lot of us here, that last part right here. But he says there at the beginning, he says, but you do not be called what? Do not be called rabbi. Why does he say that? Who's the teacher here? Jesus is, okay? Am I the teacher of this class? Yes, but am I the teacher of Christianity? No, anything that I'm getting is going to come from where? This first come from the Bible, come from Jesus. And he says, one is your teacher, the Christ, and you're all, including who, are all what? Brethren. We're all brothers to this. He says, don't call anyone on earth your father, for one he that is in heaven. And so the Christ. And so what happens is we put those names, we put those adornments, as it were, on people. And then what happens to those people? They get big-headed. I don't know if that's a new, but you set my mom long enough, you'll get a few terms that you've never heard of. A whole slew of them you might hear. But anyway, that big-headed term may not be the one that we're all familiar with, but we can all relate, right? We kind of inflate. He kind of blows up a little bit. And then what? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Saw it with James and John, with their mother in particular, wanted that seat. They wanted the seat right there. Even in religion. Well, I know what Jesus taught, but I hold this ranking in the church. And so this is my teaching, as it were, right? How many of you have ever heard somebody say something along the lines of, don't follow the preacher? You ever heard something like that? Does that mean a negative remark toward the preacher? No. What does that statement mean? Follow Jesus. You probably know of people who have preached at different places. And whenever they move to a different place, guess what a lot of the people do? They go with them, and they'll move here and they'll move there. That always happens. Well, that's a testament perhaps to a good preacher, but it also could be I'm more interested in hearing the preacher than what Jesus' teaching might be. We have to be very careful of doing that or of following that, because what happens when we build those sort of names up, I'm sorry, it's getting me to get to the question right there. When we build those names up, what happens to the one that's built up? They get humbled, right? They're ready for a fall. And what happens to the one that is humble to start with? Flips, right? Just flips. Totally. Would you rather end up here or end up down here? So if we're going to end up here, where we got to be to start with, right? We got to flip it all the way around. But it's awful nice at work. It's awful nice in the community to be up here, right? But when we're not careful, just dip right back around.
And you may be somebody that's happy up here.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is all sort of your presentation of yourself and your acceptance of sort of the recognition that may come with it as well. Now, Jesus is going to rattle off a bunch of things here, and he's going to use the word hypocritical. What does the word hypocritical or hypocrite mean? All of us have heard it. Say one and do another, okay? Other thoughts on? All right. So keep those sort of thoughts in mind over the next handful of verses. They're like one or two verses here at a time. Matthew 23, 13 and 14. Dad? Now, verse 13. What hypocritical act are the scribes and Pharisees guilty of in verse 13? So I'm got to skip ahead. So you'll have to go into your Bible there to see it. What hypocritical act in verse 13? No, it's verse 14. Verse 13 first. Verse 13 first. Shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. What does that mean? Absolutely. It said, for you neither go in yourselves, which that's your choice. But the second part then says, but you also what? Don't let other people. If I were to stand up here and say, I don't want to ever be a Christian anymore, I can say that and that's fine, but I don't need to keep you from doing that same thing, right? So it's fine if I will make that decision, but that's not something that I need to keep you from doing as well. And that's what we see in verse 13. What about verse 14? What hypocritical act were the scribes and Pharisees guilty of? What does this mean here? Devour widows' houses. Yeah, that's how I read this. It's, yeah. Absolutely. And so you say, when it says devour, what do you think of when you hear the word devour? Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily think wolf, but an animal, right? Just leave nothing left. You've probably seen those shows on nature channels or whatever where they attack and there's nothing left. I mean, it's down to stripped down to the bone. This is not nibbled on, took a little bit. It's almost, as we see, devoured everything. But on almost all of these, there's something said that they do. Ben said a minute ago, two-faced, do one thing, say one thing, do another. Verse 14, devour the widow's livelihood, but what then? For pretense make long prayers. What does that mean? They love to be seen and heard. We just saw that, right? Let's say, woe be to widow so-and-so. We hope and pray that everything will work out great and grand. You ever heard that? You ever heard those kind of prayers? You'll sometimes hear those kind of prayers. All the meanwhile, how has the woman been treated? It continues to still be treated terrible, even though praying for this. Do you remember perhaps the best story of praying in the Bible was the man who stood up and said, "Thankfully, I'm not like who? This sinner over here, this publican." All right. Sometimes we get that feeling, right? Thankfully, I am, I've done some things wrong, but at least I'm not like her, right? We sometimes fall into that sort of thing as well. That's hypocritical, isn't it? And it's the same thing that the scribes and Pharisees were doing here.
We all heard stories about widows and people just
Giving it all.
No.
No, they didn't have a television, but it sure seems a whole lot very similar to what we see right there. Now, again, there are more of these, so we're going to go on just a little bit. Mom, Matthew chapter 23, verse 15. All right. So in this verse, of what hypocritical act were the scribes and Pharisees guilty of? First thing in verse 15, it says they go where? At land, sea. They go everywhere with the purpose of what? What's the word that they use right there? Proselytize. We would probably use the word convert. I don't think we use the word proselytize anymore right there. But this act of converting them. And so that sounds really good, right? Converting somebody, that's really good. But the verse doesn't even end before it says, then they do what? Twofold more a son of hell. What does that mean? Yeah. You've converted them, but now you've taught them twice as much bad stuff as that you was even doing. And so have you really helped them at all? No, you've not helped them at all. Again, lots of hypocritical. How do you think Jesus felt about this, by the way? This is like full-scale diatribe, as it were, from Jesus. It's almost like you can see Jesus right. I got some things to get off my chest here a little bit. Why do you think these kind of things would bother Jesus so much? It is. It's making a mockery of God. Why else do you think it bothers him so much? Jesus was raised as a Jew. Jesus' life was raised as a Jew. Jesus, in a sense, we're here saying, all these things that I've been taught, all these things that I'm supposed to do, I should be looking up to you, and what are you doing? You're just flipping completely the other way. And so what is this going to do for our faith? What is this going to do for people? Think about somebody who is a preacher or teacher that you know. What if they flipped completely around? It'd be disappointing, wouldn't it? It'd be upsetting, as it were. And I think you can sense a little bit of that in Jesus right here. All right. Matthew 23, verses 16 to 22. Ben, do you care to read this one?
Fools and blind, which is great, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the temple. And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, which is great, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift. Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by all things on it. Whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it.
All right. We got a couple of things here. Verses 16 and 17. Again, same question. What's the hypocritical act that the scribes and Pharisees were guilty of in verses 16 and 17?
You can swear here, you have to keep up the here, you can swear, you can lie, you can swear.
Okay. Says it swears by the gold of the temple, right? And sometimes, why does it seem, they seem like in verses 16 and 17, there may be a little bit more about the gold than the temple, right? What does that mean? Their heart is in the fanciness that's in the temple, not so much the temple, right? The same thing in verse 18 and 19. It's kind of similar, just the words are different. What's the hypocritical act in verses 18 and 19? There we go. The gift of it that's on it. And so if we're not careful, how do we take, let me say this. If we're not careful, can we get kind of wrapped up in the things of the church rather than the teachings of Jesus? Is it fair to say, I got to be here every single time so that people see me get there every single time? Do you think ever happens with people? I'm not really going to church to learn, but I kind of want people to see me walk in that front door. Does that ever happen, do you think? All right. Can you give me another example of where we can kind of get wrapped up in the things of the church rather than the teachings of the church? Yes. True. It can. What else?
Well, teaching the truth is far more important than your building. That's what you're teaching is way more important than what you're teaching in.
What did Jesus say? He said, foxes have what? Foxes have holes, foxes have dens, birds have what? Nests, but the Son of Man has what? Nowhere to lay his head. Do you think Jesus would be more impressed with the fancy church or the teachings inside of the church? The verses right here, I took that question straight from this because that question is straight from Jesus's mouth, right? Is he fascinated with the gold and the gift and all? Is he fascinated with that? He's upset that the scribes and Pharisees were not doing what? Weren't keeping the law. They weren't doing their job that they were supposed to do. Yes, sir. Yeah. Absolutely. Uh-huh. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Bible teaches us that our yes should be what? And our no should be no. There shouldn't have to be any need to swear. But part of the reason why sometimes people swear is because I lied to you before, right? And you didn't really believe it. But if I throw a little extra oomph behind it right here, this I swear it, I promise, then maybe that gives a little more oomph to it. You'll be more likely to believe it. But the only reason you need to be more likely to believe it is because what have I done in the past? I've proven myself to not be that. And so we can sort of see that. Have the scribes and Pharisees in many cases proven themselves to be untrustworthy in this? Jesus is probably not calling them out here if they hadn't already done so. Matthew 23, verses 23 and 24. Melvina, do you care to read this? All right. Now, let's look here at verse 23 first. The questions from 23 will come to 20, but verse 23, woe to you scribes and Pharisees woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay what? Tithe of what? Mint and anise and cumin. What are those? All right, there you go. You pay these spices, you pay these tithes, but he says you forget the what? The weightier matters, right? Which is what? The truth, all right? But I dropped my quarter in, rattle it around. Did you see me? I paid this, right? Can we do that sometimes? Well, I'm not going to do anything Christ-like, but I'll throw $100 in the plate every time, and that'll help the church, right? Has that ever happened? Right. Uh-huh.
be seen by men or shouldn't be or anything.
Yes. Who is perhaps the best biblical example of somebody putting money in a plate? The poor widow, right? I said the poor widow. That's usually what we refer to. They said that she put in what? Do you remember what the story said? 2 mites, which that's a financial hard number. 2 mites, that's 2 quarters or $2 or whatever, any other figure of finance. But it's not the 2, it's what was said afterwards. It said out of what? Out of her poverty, she give what? All the living that she had. Where's her heart in that giving? So it's not a matter of, well, here's the $100, right? It's here's what I am giving out of, as Ben said, out of your heart, the love that's behind that offering there as well. Verse 24, it said, blind guides who what? Strain a gnat and swallow a camel. I don't know that anybody really says that anymore, but what's that mean? Yep. Fretting about that little small stuff. Hey, I put that money in. It's right there. But then just totally ignoring, something else. You know what a gnat is? Not enjoyable to say. Every gnat that's ever existed has flown into my mouth. I don't know that I can I don't know if I can prove the math on it, but I think every one of them have over time. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So the tithing was one of the old laws, and it was in a simplest sense a 10%, but it was more than just a straight up bank account 10%. But nonetheless, think about it that way. But the thing about 10% is we can sit down and do the math on that. We can figure that out. And 10% of $100 is what? But it ain't $10.20, is it? It's $10. And so I know I'm giving $10 because that's what the math says. But if we're not careful, then what happens there? It becomes $10. Well, it's really $10.11. I'm going to write the check for 10, that kind of thing. But where is our heart in that? It becomes rote. It becomes a mathematical formula, as it were. But that was part of the old law that went to the cross with Jesus. Right. And he's not wrong in the sense that we are to give, but everything that we have is given to us by who? By God. And we should not be limiting our ability to give back. And what we have to be careful with is sometimes we get wrapped up in that tithing idea, which is a 10% money. But it's not time. It's not effort. It's not care and love. Well, I give them 10% of the money. I got my job done. But Jesus doesn't teach that, right? It says that when somebody needs help, what should we do? Think about the story that we talked about, the Good Samaritan, right? He helped financially, but how else did he help the guy? Emotionally, physically. That's a way of giving that is necessary for us as well. And if we get caught up in the money part, we're not giving in the love and we're not giving in the help and the care that goes along with that. And I don't know how to measure out 10% of a hug or 10% of a mowed lawn. Or you probably figure that one out. That's an area formula, I guess. But you're not doing what you need to do in that case. Yes. Sure. Absolutely. Let's go to the next one, 25 and 26. Maria, do you care to read these two? 23, verse 25 and 6. All right. So what are they accused of here in verses 25 and 26? Well, while you're thinking about that, last night, Mary made salmon. Who likes salmon in here? Now, I'm talking about like fried up salmon patties. That ain't really stuff. I'm talking about the actual fish, salmon. But she made it, and then she came out and she cut into it, and she said, "Oh, it doesn't look done." And so she put it back in, needed a little bit more time in there, and then took it out, and it was ready. And so afterwards, she was working with Will with some math homework, and so I did the dishes. And I tell you the truth, the outside of that pan cleaned up wonderfully. But that inside of it, I was scrubbing and grinding to trying to get this kind of thing. And I tell you, I'll just be real honest with you. For a while, I kind of thought, I wonder if I put this up, would anybody even notice it? You know, I knew the answer to that, but I kind of thought, wonder if they'd even notice. But what does verse 25 and 26 say about the cup? It says they did what? All right, they cleaned off that outside, but that didn't really matter. There wasn't nothing dirty on the outside of it. What was dirty? Inside. What are they talking about here in verse 25 and 26? Their motives, their selves, how they acted. If we're not careful, we put the good on the outside, right? But we maybe don't let them look and see on the inside. I'd tell you, I'd have been looking for a new house if Mary pulled that pan out and saw fish skin laid in there. That probably wouldn't have went too well had that be the case. Sometimes it excites me that some of these things are found on YouTube and this kind of stuff. People will see this forever. They'll probably play this at my funeral. You wonder if you ever got that bowl cleaned. All right, verse 27 and 28. We got to roll on here. Tony, do you care to read these here? Seeing some repetitiveness here, aren't we? But it's almost like Jesus on a roll, and you just got to let him finish right here. He says in these verses, they are compared to what? Whitewashed tombs, whitewashed sepulchres. Look good on the outside, but what's on the inside? Dead men's bones, all right? We want the cemetery to look good, right? We want the stones to look good. We want it to be mowed, but what's underground? Those are dead men's bones. That's what it is. So what's he saying right here? He's not talking about cemeteries, but what's Jesus saying? Don't do things. We can clean it up awful good, but if we're dead on the inside, what's it matter? All it is just a whitewashing on the outside. Just about every single time right here. 29 through 32. Tony, do you care? Or I'm sorry, Tony. Connie, do you care to do this one? Of what hypocritical act are they guilty of in verses 29 through 32?
They built all these big shrines, memorials to the prophets that were killed, but it was their ancestors, their fathers that killed them. And two, they're seeking to kill Jesus right now. So they're full of lies about, well, we wouldn't have done that. We killed John the Baptist, or want to kill Jesus right now.
Do we ever do that? Had I been around when Jesus was alive, this would have never happened. Can we fall into that trap pretty easily? We can. And that's what Ben said right there. You see the same thing right there. And they were doing it in a sense, it was like watching the movie a second time here. It was kind of repeating itself. Right. We talked a lot about that, especially earlier in the Old Testament on our Wednesday night classes when we talked about those books. And it was like, feel like I asked the question several times, like, won't they ever learn? But what do you think they sometimes think about us as well? Won't they ever learn? It's the same sort of thing. All right, let's finish up. Booty, care to finish 33 through 36? Ben kind of took the answer there just a minute ago, but when he said that how they were kind of doing the same thing over again. What did Jesus say would come upon the scribes and the Pharisees? Well, actually, hold on to that for a second, because Connie said they have said, "Woe, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites," like 10 different times. But what does verse 33 say? First 4 words: serpents, brood of vipers. So for the first time, we see it change, right? But did it change for the better? Not necessarily. It didn't really improve in this situation. What do you say would come upon the scribes and Pharisees? I think he says all the righteous blood that had been shed there. And he's saying all these people that hadn't done anything wrong, and yet what had happened to them? They were killed. He gives an example, Zechariah and Berechiah right there. But he says all of that blood would be where? On them. Absolutely. This is Matthew 23, just a few chapters over. You're exactly right. They say utter the same thing. Yeah. 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 Verses 37, 38, and 39 to finish it. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left you to desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." This is almost Jesus' sort of last time with them, right? It's almost like, to put words into the mouth, we've went through 23 chapters of this and you ain't got it figured out yet, right? And he says, I would love as a mother hen to do what? Gather them chicks. But what? Was Jesus willing? But who was not willing? The people were not willing. And he said, it's going to be it. But the last verse there said, but when I return, what will you say? Blessed is he. Okay? So this idea of humility here that we talked about tonight. Who lacked humility in our story? The scribes and the Pharisees. Everything that they were doing was for the benefit of who? Themselves. That it was never for the benefit of the faith. It was never for the benefit of even the people that they were gathering. In fact, they were harming the people that would have been with them as well. So what's our lesson going forward for this as well? Shouldn't be about us, but should be about teaching and preaching, helping other people, but showing not what Daniel said or what you said, but showing whose words. It's fitting that the entire chapter is written in red, because red words in the Bible mean what? Jesus' teaching. There was nobody else teaching present tonight except for that of Jesus. Yeah. Sure. Right. Absolutely. Other thoughts before we wrap up? Thank you all. Next Wednesday night will not be me, but instead will be Jack. That'll be the end of our meeting, and then I'll fall back into it the next time. So thank you for that, and give me just a second.